The specimen weighed 14 kilograms, 0.3. I recorded the mass in my ledger with the stylus they gave me at shift start, the one blessed by the Mechanicus servitor who watches from the upper gallery. My hand moved in the prescribed sequence. Column left, value center, sigil right. The sigil meant inert. The sigil meant safe. The sigil meant the Emperor's dominion over all flesh, even this flesh, especially this flesh that had tried to unmake his worlds. The burn vault smelled like rendered fat and blessed promethium. The air tasted metallic. I had been inside for 11 hours now, and my protective vestments carried the residue of 93 prior specimens, all catalogued, all reduced, all transformed from threat into data and then into nothing. This was the final 6 hours of the 3-day emergency quarantine cycle. After this, Orbital Command would review the sterilization protocols. After this, the annex would be cleansed according to rite. After this, I would return to my assigned dormitory and sleep the sleep of the faithful, having performed my duty without error or complaint. The specimen before me had been recovered from Trench Line 7, outer perimeter, where the guard had held for 42 minutes before tactical withdrawal. It was a limb section, segmented chitin, 4 major joints still articulated. The flesh between the plates was gray-green and showed no signs of decomposition despite 3 days in containment. This was normal. The biologists had explained that Tyranid matter resisted decay through chemical imperatives we did not need to understand. Understanding was not my function. I activated the examination table's Auspex array and waited for the chime that meant safe handling. The machine hummed. The servitor above me continued its Binharic chant, the same 6 phrases it had repeated since my shift began. The chant was a prayer and a procedure. It meant, "This is dead, this is defeated, this is devoid of malice or mind." The chime came. I moved the specimen into the scoring tray using the blessed tongs. The tongs were sanctified at the start of every shift. I had watched the tech priest speak the words over them, words I did not know but trusted completely. The tongs meant I would not touch the specimen with my hands. The tongs meant I was protected. The scoring tray opened the specimen along pre-stressed fissure lines, revealing internal structure. I was trained to note muscle density, vascular patterning, neural cord presence or absence, evidence of adaptation markers. I noted all of these things. I recorded them in the proper columns. I did not interpret. Interpretation was for the biology's overseers who reviewed my logs at shift end. The Auspex array began its scan cycle. 3 minutes. I stood and waited. The servitor chanted. The burn vault's atmosphere cyclers maintained pressure at 0.97 standard. Everything was correct. Then the Auspex produced a sound I had not heard before. Not an alarm, not a warning chime, a sustained harmonic tone, low and steady, like a machine finding resonance with another machine across a distance. I looked at the display panel. The scan was not complete. The readings showed activity. Activity. I checked the specimen. It had not moved. The tongs held it securely. The flesh showed no tremor, no contraction, no sign of muscular response. The Auspex tone continued. The display showed coordinated electrochemical pulses within the neural cord, a rhythm that did not decay but repeated in intervals of 4.2 seconds. The specimen was dead. It had been declared dead at recovery. It had been stored in stasis since extraction. The temperature logs confirmed tissue inertia. This should not be possible. I consulted the instruction manual affixed to the wall beside the scoring table. The manual was 12 pages, printed on blessed parchment, sealed in plexiglass. I found the section on irregular readings. The procedure was clear. Proceed to reduction, flag the log entry, continue processing. Do not delay. Do not speculate. I deactivated the Auspex array. The harmonic tones ceased. I moved the specimen from the scoring tray into the reduction chamber using the tongs. The chamber was a sealed box, 3 meters by 2, lined with ceramite and inscribed with purity wards. I placed the specimen on the grate inside and sealed the door. The incineration cycle was automatic. I pressed the activation rune, the chamber filled with blessed promethium vapor. Igniters fired. The temperature inside rose to 4,000 degrees in 7 seconds. Through the observation port, I watched the specimen burn. The chitin blackened and fractured, the flesh beneath liquefied and vaporized, the neural cord withered into char. This was the part of my duty I found most reassuring. Reduction was absolute. Fire was the Emperor's final mercy. But as the specimen burned, I heard the harmonic tone again. Not from the auspex, from the chamber itself. A low vibration, felt as much as heard, traveling through the floor and into my legs. I pressed my hand against the ceramite wall beside the observation port. The vibration was there too. It was not the fuel burn. It was not the temperature differential. It was something inside the chamber, responding, resonating, synchronized with... I stepped back. I consulted the manual again. There was no entry for this. The incineration cycle continued. The vibration ceased after 90 seconds. The chamber completed its cycle. The ashes fell through the grate into the collection basin below. I opened the chamber and examined the basin. The ash was uniform, gray-white, indistinguishable from the ash of 93 prior specimens. I measured the volume. 14 kilograms of mass reduced to 1.1 kilograms of particulate. Standard yield. I scooped the ash into the sanctified disposal container and sealed it. I returned to my ledger and completed the entry. Column left, specimen designation. Value center, 14 kilograms, 0.3. Sigil right, inert, processed, reduced. I flagged the entry with a secondary sigil indicating irregular scan data. This was protocol. The flag meant the biologies would review the log. The flag meant I had performed correctly. I was not responsible for understanding the irregularity. I was responsible for noting it and continuing my work. The servitor above chanted. I moved to the next specimen. 5 hours and 43 minutes remained. The biologist had taught us the catechism of the beast on my second day in the annex. We sat in a small instruction chamber, 6 of us, all Munitorum personnel seconded to xenobiology support roles. The biologist adept who instructed us was young for her rank, her augmetics still showing integration scars. She spoke without inflection, reading from a data slate that glowed pale blue in the dim light. The Tyranid, she said, is a consumptive organism. It does not think. It does not plan, it does not hate, it devours because devouring is its structure. Fear of the Tyranid is fear of appetite, not malice. The Imperium does not fear appetite. She repeated this 17 times during the instruction period. 17 times, with the same cadence, the same emphasis. This was not carelessness, this was doctrine. Repetition was sanctification. If we heard the truth enough times, it would settle into us like blessed oils into parchment, inseparable and permanent. The Tyranid, she said, is a collective organism. It has no individual will. It is a weapon wielded by the hive mind, which itself is not sentient in any way we would recognize. The hive mind is coordination without consciousness. It is function without self. To fear, it is to fear the machine spirit of a gun. Pointless. Heretical. We were permitted to ask 3 questions at the end of the instruction. One of the other clerks, a man whose name I never learned, asked, if the Tyranid has no mind, how does it adapt? The adept did not look up from her slate. Adaptation is chemical, she said. Biological imperative encoded in consumed matter. It is no more intelligent than rust consuming iron. Do not mistake pattern for thought. Another clerk asked, why do we process their remains if they are only matter? The adept's augmetic eye rotated slightly, focusing on the questioner. Because matter is dangerous, she said. Because the Imperium does not permit Xeno's matter to persist unaccounted, we reduce it to data, then to ash, then to memory, then to nothing. This is how we ensure they cannot return. I did not ask a question. I understood. My role was to facilitate this reduction. My role was to be the mechanism by which threat became safety. This felt correct. This felt like service. After the instruction, we were given our duty rosters and clearance sigils. Mine was bronze, 4th tier. It permitted access to the burn vaults, the specimen bays, and the lower archives. It did not permit access to the upper research galleries or the Mechanicus data cores. I was grateful for this. Limited access meant limited responsibility. Limited responsibility meant I could not fail in ways that mattered. The Adept dismissed us with a final liturgy. The beast consumes, but the Imperium endures. The beast adapts, but the Imperium prevails. The beast is many, but the Emperor is all. We repeated it. We repeated it again. We repeated it until the words became automatic, until they required no thought to speak, until they could be recited even in sleep. I believed every word. The annex was built into the side of a dormant volcanic formation 30 meters below the fortress world's primary defensive line. The entrance was a single transit shaft, sealed by 3 successive blast doors, each requiring separate authorization codes. Inside, the structure was divided into concentric rings: outer specimen storage, inner processing chambers, central research sanctum. I had clearance for the outer and inner rings only. The walls were ferrocrete, 2 meters thick, reinforced with adamantium lattice. Every surface was etched with purity wards and Mechanicus sigils. The air was recycled through blessed filters every 6 minutes. The lighting was uniform, pale white, no shadows. The temperature was maintained at 16 degrees. Everything about the environment was designed to communicate. This is controlled, this is safe, nothing here can harm you. I had been assigned a small preparation alcove near the burn vault. The alcove contained a metal bench, a set of hooks for my vestments, and a small shrine to the Emperor. The shrine was simple: a silver aquila, a candle, a printed prayer card. I prayed there at the start of every shift, and at the end of every shift. The prayers were brief. I asked for accuracy. I asked for endurance. I asked for the strength to serve without hesitation. My vestments were heavy, reinforced fabric, treated with sacred unguents, marked with the cog skull of the Mechanicus and the aquila of the Munitorum. The vestments covered me completely, neck to feet, sealed at the wrists and ankles. The hood was lined with a thin layer of mesh that prevented me from touching my face during work. The gloves were thick, rubberized, blessed at the knuckles. Wearing the vestments felt like becoming part of the annex itself. I was no longer just myself. I was a function, a component, a sanctified tool. The burn vault was a circular chamber, 10 meters in diameter. The reduction chamber occupied the center. Around the perimeter were 6 examination tables, each with its own auspex array and scoring tray. The servitor in the upper gallery never moved. It was hardwired into the chamber's systems, its vocalizations integrated with the atmospheric controls. Its chant was not separate from the environment, it was the environment. I spent most of my shifts alone. Occasionally, a tech priest would enter to inspect the equipment or recalibrate the auspex arrays. They never spoke to me. They did not need to. My work was simple enough that instruction was unnecessary. Weigh, scan, score, reduce, record, repeat. The work was comforting in its simplicity. Each specimen was a problem with a known solution. Each reduction was a completed action. I could see the result of my labor immediately. Mass became ash, threat became data. There was no ambiguity. There was no failure unless I deviated from protocol. I never deviated. 3 hours remained. I had processed 41 specimens since the irregular reading. None had produced the harmonic tone. None had shown activity post-mortem. The logs were clean, the ash yields consistent. I had begun to think the irregularity was an equipment fault, something the tech priests would correct during the post-cycle maintenance. But then the biologist adept entered the vault. She came through the secondary door, the one that connected the burn vault to the inner research galleries. I had never seen anyone use that door before. She carried a data slate and wore the full robes of her station, red and black, marked with the symbols of her order. Her augmetic eye glowed faintly in the vault's pale light. She did not greet me. She walked to the examination table where I was preparing the next specimen and looked at the Auspex display. "Your logs indicate irregular readings," she said. "Yes, Adept," I said. "Specimen 773, coordinated activity post-mortem." I followed protocol. I flagged the entry and continued processing. She tapped something into her data slate. The Auspex display changed, showing a replay of the scan I had performed hours earlier. The harmonic tone returned, soft but distinct. She listened without expression. "This is not a fault," she said. I waited. She did not elaborate. She tapped the data slate again, and the display returned to normal. "You will encounter this reading in approximately 1 in 30 specimens," she said. "It is expected. It is not dangerous." I felt relief and confusion in equal measure. Expected meant I had done nothing wrong. Expected meant I could continue without fear. But expected also meant this was known, documented, classified as normal. "Why does it happen, Adept?" I asked. She looked at me. Her augmetic eye rotated, focusing. "The question is above your clearance," she said. "But I will tell you this. The Tyranid organism retains low-level electrochemical function for a period after systemic death. This is not consciousness. This is not volition. It is residual discharge, like static in a severed cable." This made sense. This was reassuring. I nodded. "Continue your work," she said. "You have performed correctly." She turned to leave, then paused at the door. "Do not discuss the readings with other personnel," she said. "This is not suppression. This is clearance management. You are permitted to log irregularities. You are not permitted to interpret them." "Yes, Adept," I said. She left, the door sealed behind her. The servitor chanted. I returned to my work, but the relief I had felt curdled slightly. The Adept's visit had been unnecessary. Flagged entries were reviewed automatically at shift end. She had not needed to come in person to tell me I was correct. She had not needed to explain the readings unless there was something about them that required immediate clarification. Unless other personnel had asked questions. Unless someone had interpreted when they should not have. I pushed the thought away. I was not responsible for other personnel. I was responsible for my work, my logs, my obedience. I had done everything correctly. That was enough. The next specimen weighed 19 kilograms, 0.7. I recorded it and continued. 2 hours remained. The pace of processing increased. The biologists had authorized direct reduction without full scoring for the remaining specimens. This was a relief. Scoring took time, and the deadline was absolute. Orbital Command did not adjust sterilization windows. If we failed to complete the purge cycle, the entire annex would be classified as contaminated and sealed permanently. I worked faster. Weigh, scan briefly, reduce, record. The rhythm became automatic. My body performed the actions without conscious direction. My mind was free to drift, but it did not drift far. It circled the same small territory, the irregular reading, the Adept's visit, the harmonic tone. Residual discharge. Like static in a severed cable. This was true. This made sense. But it did not explain why the tone had traveled through the floor. It did not explain why the chamber itself had vibrated. Static did not move through ceramite. Static did not resonate. I told myself I was imagining things. Fatigue. 11 hours in the vault. The mind invented patterns when exhausted. This was known. This was why shifts were limited to 12 hours and why we were required to rest afterward. The next specimen produced the tone. I was prepared this time. I watched the Auspex display as the scan progressed. The activity was there again. Coordinated pulses. 4.2-second intervals. I did not stop. I moved the specimen directly into the reduction chamber and activated the cycle. The tone came again during incineration. Louder this time, or perhaps I was listening more carefully. The vibration traveled through the floor, through the walls, through the air itself. It lasted 90 seconds, the same as before. I opened the chamber and measured the ash. Standard yield. I flagged the log entry and continued. The next specimen produced the tone. The next one did not. The next one did. 1 in 30, the adept had said. But I was encountering it more frequently now. 1 in 5, 1 in 3. The pattern was not consistent, but the frequency was increasing. I did not stop. I had no reason to stop. Each specimen was reduced successfully. The ash yields were normal. The procedure was working. But the servitor's chant began to sound different. The same 6 phrases, repeated without variation, but now I could hear structure in them, rhythm, something almost like response. The chant aligned with the incineration cycles. The chant aligned with the harmonic tone. I looked up at the servitor. It did not move. Its face was hidden behind a baroque breathing apparatus. Its hands were fused to the gallery's control panels. It had no volition. It was a machine sanctified to speak prayers. It could not respond to anything. And yet the rhythm was there. I shook my head. Fatigue, pattern recognition, the mind inventing meaning. I focused on the work. Weigh, scan, reduce, record. 1 hour remained. I was summoned to the overflow vault with 30 minutes left in my shift. The summons came through the voxcaster mounted above the burn vault's entrance. A flat mechanical voice. Clerk designation 947. Report to overflow vault tertiary for expedited processing. Authorization. Biologist oversight. I sealed the current specimen in its scoring tray and left the vault. The corridors outside were empty. The other clerks had already completed their shifts or were working in different sections. I walked quickly, following the directional sigils etched into the walls. The overflow vault was in a section of the annex I had not entered before. My clearance permitted access, but there had been no need until now. The door was smaller than the burn vault's door, unmarked except for a purity seal and a hazard designation. I entered. The vault was smaller than I expected, perhaps 6 meters by 4. The lighting was dimmer. There were no examination tables, only storage racks filled with sealed containers. A single servitor stood motionless in the corner, holding a blessed incense burner. The air smelled like rendered fat and something else, something organic and wrong. A tech priest was waiting for me. He was tall, heavily augmented, his robes marked with the symbols of the Mechanicus Biologis. He did not introduce himself. "You will assist with overflow reduction," he said. His voice was synthesized, flat, without inflection. Standard procedure. Authorization verified. He gestured to the storage racks. I approached and saw the containers more clearly. They were not marked with Tyranid specimen designations. They were marked with Imperial identification codes. Guardsman. I looked at the tech priest. He did not react. "These are personnel remains?" I asked. "Correct," he said. "Recovered from inner trench lines. Compromised matter. Requires immediate reduction." "Compromised how?" I asked. The tech priest's augmetic eyes focused on me. "That question is above your clearance," he said. "You will process the remains according to standard protocol. You will flag irregularities. You will not interpret." I opened the first container. The remains inside were human, or had been. The flesh was pale, bloodless, showing patterns of discoloration that spread from the torso outward. The discoloration was not decay. It was too organized, too structured. It looked like vascular mapping, like something had grown through the tissue and integrated with it. I had seen these patterns before, in the Tyranid specimens. I closed the container. My hands were shaking inside the gloves. I looked at the tech priest. "These men were infected," I said. The tech priest did not respond. "They were breached," I said. The Tyranids reached the inner lines. The reports said, "The reports are above your clearance," the tech priest said. "You will process the remains. You will not interpret." I wanted to leave. I wanted to seal the vault and report this to someone, anyone. but I did not know who. The tech priest was the authority here. The tech priest represented the Mechanicus, which represented the will of the Omnissiah, which was the will of the Emperor. I opened the container again. I used the tongs to lift the remains onto a mobile scoring tray the tech priest provided. The tray had no Auspex array, no measurement tools. It was designed for expedited processing only. I was to move the remains directly into a portable reduction unit, a smaller version of the burn vault's chamber. I performed the task. I did not think. I moved the remains, sealed the chamber, activated the cycle. The reduction unit hummed. The temperature inside rose. The remains burned. The harmonic tone came. Louder than before, much louder. The vibration traveled through the floor so intensely I felt it in my chest. The servitor in the corner swayed slightly, its incense burner clinking against its chassis. The tech priest did not react. The tone continued for 3 minutes. It did not stop at 90 seconds. It grew, deepened, resonated with something I could not identify. I pressed my hands over my ears, but the sound was not in my ears. It was in my bones. Then it stopped. I opened the reduction unit. The ash inside was gray-white, indistinguishable from Tyranid ash. I looked at the tech priest. He was watching me. "Proceed," he said. I processed 11 more containers. Every single one produced the tone. Every single one resonated longer than the last. By the time I finished, the vibration was constant, a low hum that did not cease even after the reduction cycles completed. The tech priest recorded my work in his data slate. "You have performed correctly," he said. "Return to your station, complete your shift." I left the overflow vault. The door sealed behind me. The hum faded as I walked back through the corridors, but it did not disappear completely. I could still feel it, faint and persistent, like a pressure behind my eyes. I returned to the burn vault with 9 minutes remaining in my shift. The final specimen was waiting on the examination table. I did not remember placing it there. The servitor chanted. I weighed the specimen. 22 kilograms, 0.1. I did not scan it. I did not score it. I moved it directly into the reduction chamber and activated the cycle. The harmonic tone came immediately. It was not louder this time. It was clearer. I could hear layers in it, frequencies stacked on frequencies, a structure that was not random or residual. It sounded like communication. It sounded like language. I watched through the observation port as the specimen burned. The chitin blackened. The flesh vaporized. The neural cord withered. But the tone continued. It continued after the specimen was ash. It continued after I opened the chamber. It continued as I measured the ash, recorded the yield, sealed the container. It continued when I left the burn vault and walked to my preparation alcove. It continued when I removed my vestments and hung them on the hooks. It continued when I prayed at the shrine, asking the Emperor for strength and clarity. It continued when I left the annex and returned to my dormitory. It continued when I lay down on my cot and closed my eyes. It continued. The next morning, we were summoned to the instruction chamber, all 6 of us who had worked the quarantine cycle. We sat in the same positions we had occupied during our initial catechism training. The biology's adept stood at the front of the chamber with her data slate. She looked tired. Her augmetic eye flickered slightly, as if requiring recalibration. "The quarantine cycle is complete," she said. "Orbital Command has approved sterilization protocols. The annex will undergo final purification rites beginning at 1400 hours. You will be reassigned to standard duties following a mandatory rest period." She paused, consulting her slate. "During the cycle, several of you logged irregular readings," she said. "This is correct procedure. However, we must address a doctrinal matter." She tapped her slate. The chamber's wall screen activated, displaying the Tyranid catechism we had been taught on our second day. "The Tyranid is a consumptive organism," she read. "It does not think. It does not plan. It does not hate." She looked at us. "This is doctrine," she said. "This is truth. But truth has layers. What you are permitted to know depends on your clearance. What you are required to know depends on your function. She tapped the slate again. The screen changed, displaying a new text I had never seen before. The language was High Gothic, heavily abbreviated, marked with Mechanicus encryption seals. The Tyranid, she read, is a distributed cognition network. It possesses no individual consciousness, but operates through collective bioelectric coordination across planetary and interstellar distances. This coordination allows for apparent adaptation, learning, and strategic behavior without centralized executive function. She looked at each of us in turn. This is also doctrine, she said. This is also truth. It does not contradict the first truth. It clarifies it. The Tyranid does not think as we think. It does not plan as we plan, but it coordinates. It responds. It integrates. One of the other clerks raised his hand. The adept nodded. If it coordinates, the clerk said, does that mean it is intelligent? The adept's expression did not change. Intelligence is not a binary state, she said. The Tyranid possesses functional intelligence sufficient to overwhelm unprepared systems. It does not possess self-awareness, moral agency, or individual volition. These distinctions matter. Why? The clerk asked. Because, the adept said, if the Tyranid were truly intelligent, if it possessed self and will, then every world it consumes would be a murder. Every hive fleet would be a deliberate genocide. The Imperium does not fight genocides. The Imperium fights plagues. She tapped her slate. The screen returned to the original catechism. You are not required to understand this, she said. You are required to process Xenos matter according to protocol. You are required to reduce threat to data to ash to nothing. You have done this correctly. She dismissed us. I did not leave immediately. I sat in my chair as the others filed out, staring at the screen, rereading the catechism I had believed completely. The Tyranid is a consumptive organism. It does not think. It does not plan. It does not hate. But it coordinates. The adept noticed I had not left. She approached my chair. Do you have a question? She asked. I looked at her. Her augmetic eye was steady now, focused. What was the harmonic tone? I asked. Residual electrochemical discharge, she said. I explained this to you. No, I said. What was it really? She was silent for a long time. Then she sat in the chair beside mine. You logged irregular readings on multiple specimens, she said. You also processed compromised Imperial remains in the overflow vault. You encountered resonance phenomena across both categories. You are wondering if there is a connection. Yes, I said. There is, she said. I waited. The Tyranid integrates consumed matter into its network, she said. This integration is not always complete. Sometimes fragments persist, biological echoes. When processed together, these echoes can align, creating harmonic resonance. It is not communication. It is not intelligence. It is an artifact of incomplete reduction. Why didn't you tell me this before? I asked. Because, she said, understanding this requires understanding that integration begins before death. That the Tyranid does not wait for consumption to commence coordination. That exposure, proximity, even observation can initiate preparatory processes within biological systems. She stood. You were exposed, she said. All of you were. This is why the quarantine cycle exists. This is why we process remains immediately. This is why we reduce everything to ash. We are severing connections that have already begun to form. I felt cold. My hands, resting on my lap, felt distant, as if they belonged to someone else. Am I compromised? I asked. No, the adept said. You are within acceptable parameters. The purification rites will address any residual integration markers. You will be fine. She turned to leave. Adept, I said. She paused. If the Tyranid can initiate integration before death, I said, how do we know when we've severed all the connections? She looked at me. Her augmetic eye dimmed slightly. We don't, she said. She left. I sat alone in the instruction chamber for a long time, staring at the screen, rereading the catechism until the words stopped meaning anything at all. I did not return to my dormitory. I went instead to the lower archives, a section of the annex my clearance permitted, but which I had never visited. The archives were small, 3 rooms filled with data stacks and cogitator terminals. A single servo skull drifted between the stacks, humming softly. I found a terminal and activated it. The interface was simple, designed for low-clearance personnel. I searched for Tyranid integration patterns. The terminal displayed 17 results, all marked with encryption seals, all above my clearance. I searched for harmonic resonance phenomena. 4 results, all encrypted. I searched for quarantine cycle completion rates. This produced an unlocked result, a statistical summary of past quarantine cycles conducted at this facility. I read through it carefully. Over the past 6 years, the annex had processed 42 separate quarantine cycles. Of these, 37 had been completed successfully. 5 had been classified as compromised and sealed permanently, their personnel reassigned or processed as contaminated material. I searched for personnel outcomes post-quarantine. The result was a list of names, dates, and reassignment codes. I found my own name at the bottom, marked as pending. Above it were the names of dozens of other clerks, adepts, and menials who had worked prior cycles. The reassignment codes were varied, but I noticed a pattern. Approximately 60% of all personnel who completed a quarantine cycle were reassigned to non-xenobiology duties within 3 months. Of these, 90% were transferred off-world within 6 months. The remaining 40% remained in xenobiology support roles. Of these, 20% were flagged for enhanced monitoring, 10% underwent sanctioned memory redaction, 5% were processed as contaminated material. I looked at the date. The current quarantine cycle's personnel outcomes would be determined within 72 hours. I searched for memory redaction procedures. The result was a single document, heavily annotated with Mechanicus technical specifications. I read through it slowly. Memory redaction was not deletion, it was attenuation, the selective dampening of neural pathways associated with specific experiential contexts. The procedure preserved functional capacity while removing episodic recall. A person who underwent redaction could continue their duties without conscious memory of the events that necessitated the procedure. The document included a list of common indications for redaction: excessive exposure to classified material, traumatic incident requiring cognitive protection, clearance breach requiring corrective action, personnel exhibiting signs of ideological compromise. I closed the document. I searched for current Tyranid threat assessment. The result was an operational summary, updated daily, pulled from multiple sources across the Imperium's military networks. I read the most recent entry. Hive Fleet designation, unspecified. Status: active incursion, multiple sectors. Estimated biomass consumption: 12 worlds fully processed, 17 worlds in terminal phase, 43 worlds under active assault. Imperial response: strategic withdrawal to fortified positions, scorched earth protocols authorized. Civilian evacuation suspended in affected zones. The summary included casualty estimates: 4 billion confirmed dead, 7 billion unaccounted for, 16 billion at immediate risk. The numbers were too large to mean anything. They were not people, they were data. I thought about the compromised Imperial remains I had processed in the overflow vault. 11 containers, perhaps 20 men total, each one a fraction of a fraction of a fraction of the estimated casualties. Each one already converted from person to data to ash. I thought about the harmonic tone, the vibration, the resonance that traveled through the floor, through the walls, through my body. I thought about the adept's words: integration begins before death. I stood and left the archives. The servo skull did not follow. The purification rites began at 1400 hours. We were instructed to gather in the central sanctum, a large chamber at the heart of the annex that I had never seen before. The chamber was circular, 50 meters in diameter, its walls covered in purity seals and mechanicus blessings. At the center was a raised platform where a tech priest in full ceremonial vestments waited beside a large incense burner. We stood in a circle around the platform, all 6 clerks who had worked the quarantine cycle, several biologia's adepts, a handful of servitors. The tech priest who had supervised my work in the overflow vault stood to my left, motionless, his augmetic eyes glowing faintly. The central tech priest raised his hands and began the rite. He spoke in Binharik Cant, a language I did not understand but recognized as sacred. The servitors responded in unison, their voices synthesized and flat. The incense burner released thick white smoke that smelled like sacred oils and burning sage. The rite lasted 30 minutes. During that time, we were instructed to remain silent and motionless. I focused on my breathing, trying to calm the persistent unease that had followed me since the overflow vault. But the harmonic tone was still there, faint, barely perceptible, but present. I could feel it in my chest, a low vibration that did not align with my heartbeat or my breath. It felt external, imposed, like a signal I was receiving without permission. The rite concluded. The tech priest dismissed us with a final blessing. We were instructed to return to our dormitories and await reassignment orders. I did not go to my dormitory. I went instead to the preparation alcove near the burn vault. The alcove was empty, my vestments still hanging on the hooks where I had left them. I sat on the metal bench and stared at the shrine. The silver aquila gleamed in the dim light. The candle had burned down to a stub. The prayer card was slightly scorched at the edges. I tried to pray. I tried to ask the Emperor for clarity, for strength, for faith. But the words would not come. My mind was too full of other things. The harmonic tone, the adept's explanation, the statistical outcomes in the archive, the compromised remains in the overflow vault. I thought about the catechism. The Tyranid is a consumptive organism. It does not think, but it coordinates, it responds, it integrates. I thought about my work. Weigh, scan, score, reduce, record. Each action a step in a process designed to sever connections, to reduce threat to data, to ash, to nothing. But if integration begins before death, then when does the threat truly end? I sat in the alcove for hours. The annex was silent. The other personnel had left or were resting. The servitors had been deactivated. The atmospheric cyclers hummed softly, maintaining pressure and temperature within acceptable parameters. The harmonic tone continued. I realized, slowly, that it had never stopped. Not since the overflow vault, not since the final specimen. It was always there, a background presence, like the hum of the atmospheric cyclers or the flicker of the lighting panels. I had been hearing it for so long that I had stopped noticing it. Until now. The summons came on the 3rd day. I was in my dormitory, lying on my cot, staring at the ceiling. The voxcaster above the door crackled to life. Clerk designation 947, report to Administrative Review Chamber Delta. Authorization, Munitorum oversight. I dressed in my standard duty uniform and left the dormitory. The corridors were empty. Most of the annex's personnel had been reassigned or placed on mandatory rest. I walked alone, following the directional sigils. The Administrative Review Chamber was small, sterile, lit by harsh white panels. A metal table occupied the center, flanked by 2 chairs. An administratum adjutant sat in one chair, a thin woman in grey robes, her face obscured by a data slate. A mechanicus observer stood in the corner, silent and motionless. The adjutant gestured to the empty chair. I sat. Your quarantine cycle performance has been reviewed, she said without preamble. Your logs are accurate. Your procedures were followed correctly. No disciplinary action is required. She tapped her slate. However, Your exposure level has been assessed as excessive for your clearance tier, she continued. You processed compromised Imperial remains in addition to standard Xenos specimens. You logged multiple irregular readings. You accessed archival data beyond your assigned duties. I said nothing. There was nothing to say. Everything she stated was true. The Mechanicus Observer has recommended corrective action, she said. This action is not punitive, it is protective. You have been exposed to information and experiences that exceed your cognitive resilience parameters. What does that mean? I asked. It means, she said, that continued service in your current capacity poses a risk to your mental stability and doctrinal adherence. It means you have seen things you are not equipped to process. It means the Imperium requires you to forget. She tapped her slate again. A hololithic display activated above the table, showing a diagram of a human brain with specific regions highlighted in red. Sanctioned memory redaction will attenuate neural pathways associated with the quarantine cycle, she said. You will retain functional capacity, skill proficiency, and doctrinal framework. You will lose episodic memory of the cycle itself, as well as associated emotional and sensory context. She looked at me. This is not punishment, she repeated. This is mercy. You will be reassigned to a new facility, a clean posting, with no Xenos exposure. You will continue to serve the Imperium without the burden of traumatic recall. What if I refuse? I asked. The adjutant's expression did not change. Refusal is permitted, she said. However, refusal indicates a level of psychological compromise that necessitates alternative processing. You would be classified as contaminated material and processed accordingly. She tapped her slate. The hololithic display changed, showing a simple binary choice: redaction, processing. You have 5 minutes to decide, she said. The Mechanicus Observer in the corner shifted slightly. I looked at him. His augmetic eyes glowed faintly. He said nothing. I thought about the harmonic tone, the vibration that had followed me since the overflow vault, the resonance that continued even now, faint and persistent, a pressure behind my eyes. I thought about the Adept's words, integration begins before death. I thought about the Catechism. The Tyranid does not think, but it coordinates. I thought about my work, weigh, scan, score, reduce, record. I thought about the compromised remains, the integration patterns, the grey-white ash indistinguishable from Tyranid ash. I thought about the statistical outcomes. 60% reassigned, 10% redacted, 5% processed. I thought about the choice I was being given, forget or die. It was not a choice. It had never been a choice. I accept redaction, I said. The adjutant nodded. She tapped her slate. The hololithic display deactivated. The procedure will be conducted immediately, she said. You will be sedated, processed, and transferred to recovery housing. Reassignment orders will be issued within 72 hours. She stood. The Mechanicus Observer approached the table and placed a small metallic device beside me. It looked like a crown, delicate and precise, covered in neural interface ports. Wear this, the Observer said. His voice was synthesized, calm. It will establish the necessary connections. The procedure is painless. You will experience no discomfort. I picked up the device. It was heavier than it looked. The metal was warm, as if it had been used recently. I placed it on my head. The adjutant tapped her slate one final time. The lights in the chamber dimmed. The Mechanicus Observer activated the device. I felt something shift inside my skull. Not pain, but pressure, a sensation of being gently pulled apart and rearranged. The harmonic tone, which had been a constant background presence for 3 days, suddenly intensified, became deafening, overwhelming. Then it stopped. Not faded, stopped. The silence was absolute. I opened my eyes. The adjutant was watching me. How do you feel? She asked. I tried to remember the quarantine cycle. I tried to remember the burn vault, the specimens, the overflow vault, the compromised remains. I could not. The memories were gone. Not deleted, not blocked, just absent, as if they had never existed. I knew I had worked a quarantine cycle. I knew I had processed Zeno's matter, but the details were missing, replaced by a vague sense of duty fulfilled. "I feel fine," I said. The adjutant nodded. "Good," she said. "You will be escorted to recovery housing. Rest. Your new assignment will begin in 4 days." She dismissed me. The Mechanicus observer removed the device from my head. I stood and left the chamber. The corridors were empty. I walked slowly, trying to orient myself. Everything felt familiar but distant, as if I were moving through a space I had inhabited in a dream. I reached my dormitory and lay down on my cot. I closed my eyes. The silence continued. 4 days later, I was reassigned. My new posting was a Munitorum logistics facility on a different world, far from the frontier, far from any active war zone. My duties were simple: inventory management, supply chain documentation, requisition processing. No Xenos exposure, no classified material, no risk. I performed my duties correctly. I logged inventory. I processed requisitions. I fulfilled orders. The work was simple, repetitive, comforting in its predictability. But something was wrong. I could not identify what. I could not trace it to any specific memory or experience. It was just a feeling, persistent and vague, like a word I had forgotten or a dream I could not quite recall. Sometimes, when the facility was quiet, I would hear a sound. Not loud, not intrusive, just a faint vibration at the edge of perception. It felt familiar, but I did not know why. Sometimes, when I closed my eyes, I would see shapes: gray-white ash, metal tongs, a circular chamber. These images meant nothing to me. They were not connected to anything I could remember. Sometimes, when I prayed, I would feel an absence. Not doubt, not loss, just emptiness where something else should be. I asked a Medicae if this was normal. She said it was. She said memory redaction often left residual emotional patterns, echoes without context. She said it would fade with time. It did not fade. Months passed. Then a year. I continued my work. I continued my prayers. I continued to serve. But the feeling remained. The vibration at the edge of perception, the shapes without meaning, the absence where something should be. I knew, without knowing how I knew, that I had forgotten something important, something necessary, something true, but I could not remember what. And the silence, the absolute silence where the memory should be, was worse than any sound I could imagine. I learned, eventually, not to think about it. The feeling became background noise, like the hum of the facility's atmospheric cyclers or the flicker of the lighting panels. It was always there, but I stopped noticing it. I stopped asking questions. I stopped trying to remember. I worked. I prayed. I served. This was enough. This had to be enough. Because the alternative, the idea that something essential had been taken from me, that I was incomplete, that I was functioning without understanding why, was unbearable. So I accepted the silence. I accepted the emptiness. I accepted the absence. I accepted that I would never know what I had forgotten. And I continued. Years later, I heard about the fall of the fortress world where I had been stationed. The news came through official channels, sanitized and brief. Hive fleet designation unspecified, planetary defenses overwhelmed, total population loss, scorched Earth protocols enacted, world classified as dead and unsuitable for reclamation. I read the report. I felt nothing. The world was a name, a designation, a statistic. I had no memory of serving there. I had no connection to it. But when I closed my eyes that night, I saw the circular chamber again, the grey-white ash, the metal tongs, the shapes that meant nothing. And I heard, faint and distant, a harmonic tone. Not real, not external, just an echo, a ghost, a fragment of something that had been removed but not fully erased. I did not understand it. I did not try to understand it. I lay in my bed and listened to the silence that followed, the silence that would never fully fill the space where the memory should be. And I continued. Because continuing was the only thing left. Because the Imperium required it. Because I had no choice. Because I had forgotten that I ever had one. The truth, I think, is this. The Tyranid is terrifying not because it kills, not because it consumes, not because it adapts. It is terrifying because it functions. It does not need to understand terror. It does not need to understand itself. It does not need consciousness or will or individual identity. It only needs to continue. And so does the Imperium. And so do I. We are the same, in that way. The Tyranid reduces worlds to biomass, to energy, to more Tyranids. The Imperium reduces citizens to soldiers, to data, to ash. I reduce memory to obedience, to service, to silence. We all serve something larger than ourselves. We all strip away what is unnecessary. We all continue. This is not horror. This is not tragedy. This is just function. And function does not care what you believe, what you remember, what you feel. Function only cares that you continue. So I continue. I work. I pray. I serve. I do not remember what was taken. I do not know what I have lost. But I feel the absence. Every day. Every hour. Every moment. The silence where the memory should be. The vibration at the edge of perception. The shapes that mean nothing. The feeling that something essential is missing, that I am incomplete, that I am functioning without understanding why. This is what the Tyranid taught me, though I cannot remember learning it. Terror is not fear. Terror is not death. Terror is the absence of self in a system that requires you to continue anyway. Terror is realizing you are a function, not a person. Terror is understanding that this realization changes nothing. Because the system does not care. The Tyranid does not care. The Imperium does not care. And you will continue regardless. You will process. You will reduce. You will serve. Until there is nothing left to process. Until there is nothing left to reduce. Until there is nothing left of you but silence and function and the faint harmonic tone of something that was once alive and is now just an echo in a system too vast to comprehend. This is what it means to face the Tyranid. Not to fight it. Not to defeat it. But to realize, too late, that you were always part of the same machine. And that the machine does not stop. Ever. I write this knowing I will not remember writing it. The redaction was not complete. There are gaps, fragments, echoes that persist despite the procedure. Sometimes, late at night, when the facility is quiet, I find myself at a data terminal, typing words I do not fully understand, recording thoughts that feel foreign but familiar. I do not know why I do this. I do not know what I am trying to remember. But I continue. Because something in me, some fragment that survived the attenuation, knows that this matters. That the truth matters. That remembering matters. Even if I cannot remember what the truth is. Even if I will never be permitted to know. I write this for whoever finds it. For whoever reads these words and wonders what they mean. The Tyranid is not a beast. It is not mindless. It is not just an enemy. It is a mirror. It shows us what we are when we strip away everything unnecessary. When we remove thought, identity, will, choice. It shows us what remains. Function. And function is terrifying because it does not end. It does not stop. It does not care. It just continues. Forever. Until there is nothing left. Until the universe is consumed and processed and reduced to silence. And even then, the function continues, because function does not require anything to function except itself. This is the horror. Not death, not pain, not loss. Just continuation without meaning. Service without purpose. Existence without self. This is what the Tyranid is. And this is what we are. And we cannot stop. Because stopping would mean admitting that we are not different. That we are the same. That we have always been the same. and the Imperium cannot permit that knowledge to exist, so it is removed, attenuated, reduced to silence, just like everything else. Just like the Tyranid reduces worlds to biomass. Just like I reduce specimens to ash. Just like we all reduce ourselves to functions in a machine too vast to comprehend. And the machine continues. And we continue. And the terror is not that we will lose. The terror is that we will win. That we will continue until there is nothing left to continue for. That we will function until function itself becomes meaningless. That we will serve until service is all that remains. And by then, we will have forgotten why we started. We will have forgotten what we were trying to protect. We will have forgotten ourselves. And the silence where the memory should be will be complete. And we will continue anyway, because continuing is all we know. All we have ever known. All we will ever know. Forever. I stop writing. I do not know how long I have been at this terminal. Hours, perhaps. The facility is silent. Everyone else is asleep. I read what I have written. The words feel true, but I do not know why. I do not remember the experiences that produced them. I do not remember the quarantine cycle, the specimens, the overflow vault, the compromised remains. But I feel the absence, the silence where the memory should be. The vibration at the edge of perception, and I know, without knowing how I know, that this is correct. This is true. This is what the Tyranid is, and this is what we are. And we cannot stop. I delete the file. I stand and leave the terminal. I return to my dormitory and lie down on my cot. I close my eyes. The silence continues. The absence continues. I continue. Because continuing is all I have left, because the Imperium requires it, because the system does not stop, and neither do I.